Welcome to Well Since You Asked Me, the podcast where curiosity sparks conversation. I'm Len, your host. In this episode, I sit down with Keisha, a friend and former colleague, to unpack our shared experiences growing up in predominantly white spaces. From childhood to parenthood, we reflect on the choices our parents made, the impact on our identities, and how we navigate similar decisions for our own children. Join us in our discussion on race, belonging, and the complexities of shaping our children's environments. So sit back, grab your favorite drink, and let's get into it. So a few weeks ago, someone posted this tweet posing this question: is it wrong to place your child in an environment where they're the only Black child? And is it a disservice to them? So my next guest and I met at work, where we quickly discovered we had a shared experience. Both of us grew up in predominantly white environments. So I'm excited to welcome Keisha as we explore our experiences and discuss how they shaped or they didn't shape our life journey. Keisha, welcome to Well Since You Asked Me. I'm so glad to have you here. And let's start with you telling us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and what that experience was like for you.
Well, I'm really happy to be here, Coretta. Thank you so much for
Of course.
asking. So I grew up predominantly in Florida, and then I spent a couple of years, like my middle school years, late elementary, middle school years in Tennessee and extreme North Georgia,
Okay.
and then back to Florida. So mostly I'm a Southern girl. I'm a Southern.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did. My mother had this, I guess the idea, the dream, the thought
Mm.
that if we had lived in predominantly Black areas, and there were things I guess
Mm.
she wanted to see, and we started to move to areas that were predominantly white, especially in North Georgia and Tennessee. Um, the years we're talking basically like from five when we moved
Okay.
away from Miami to Orlando, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that went all the way up until I went back to Florida at 14.
Oh, wow. So it was an intentional move for your mother. That was something that was intentional for her.
It was. It
Okay.
was. Mhm.
Yeah. So I want to get into that. We both have children.
Mhm.
And is that something that was intentional for your children to also be in environments that were, I don't know, predominantly white or Black or mixed? Or what do you think?
So I ended up marrying a white man
Mhm.
who was very comfortable in the Black community. So it wasn't, that wasn't necessarily a driver, but
Uh-huh.
I think it kind of happened because we both had shared goals. And the
Interesting.
goal was to make sure that the kids were well educated, and a lot of
Hmm.
schools, unfortunately, the better funded schools and better supported schools are predominantly white. But what I did do with my kids moving into these white areas is my own intention,
Hmm.
um, was to make sure that they were able to at least see somebody that looked like their mama. And so
Okay.
I joined Mocha Moms, and
Okay.
I did things to make sure that they saw other
Hmm.
people, and knew that there were people that were brown, more brown than them, brown like mommy.
Sure.
Um, but I didn't feel the need to leave that area because the goal was a good school, a safe
Hmm.
environment, a good education. And we found that, and there was just no reason to leave it.
And do you think that your mom had that similar goal in mind, that she wanted to make sure that you were in an area that was well educated, that had the resources?
Well,
Mhm.
brass tacks, I think that was periphery. I think
Mm.
that was, unfortunately, my stepfather had an addiction.
Okay.
And so what my mother was trying to do was to move us out of areas where that would be readily available. I think like she would never say that. Like if you share this to
Sure.
me, she's going to come to you and say, that is not, you know. Um, but I think that that probably was more the driver for my mom. And it just so happened that we ended up in predominantly white areas.
So interesting. So I grew up in Southern California,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if it was intentional that we were in predominantly white areas. Maybe because my dad was a Marine and my mom did not want us to go to school on base. She wanted us to go to school in town. And so I was the only, my sister and I were in elementary school, the only Black kids in the entire school.
Mhm.
I was always the only Black person in my classes until I moved to Oklahoma my senior year in high school, and I was super excited. The interesting thing about that, though, is that you talk about an addiction and making sure you think that your mom's driver was that it was the addiction and making sure you were out of that environment. There was so much access to illegal drugs in my school. It was unbelievable. They
So I
smoked
didn't
and
want to
got high.
go there, but I was going to say it didn't work.
It's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
we
worked.
associate, and the interesting thing with us is that I remember being in a session that we had at work. It was on biases, right? And so these biases that we associate with certain people, and we don't necessarily think that if we take drugs or whatever it is, substance abuse, that it is in the white environment. It is so prevalent there. They went surfing, and I think they were high every day. I have no
Almost
idea.
like they invented it. Like it's
Yeah, yeah.
there's like a certain, yeah, no, it's in, and I don't understand. You know what I ultimately I think what it is that we end up having this view
Mm-hmm.
of other as just having it better than us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we I think kind of cloud our eyes over some of the things that, especially the older generation,
Yeah.
we cloud our eyes over the things that they're really actually no, they're dealing with the exact same things that we do. They just have greater privilege to get away with
That is absolutely correct. That's a
it.
great. So, being in those environments, how did you feel being like maybe the only or one of few Black girls? Because I'm going to say girls because it is a difference, I think, for
World of
girls,
difference.
being in those environments.
Yeah, I so there was definitely, a developmental metamorphosis. Now that I
Hmm.
raised children to adulthood, baby adults,
Yes.
but they're still adults.
Right.
Um, Now that I've done it, I'm able to look at my own development and kind of see,
Mm-hmm.
where things were shaped and how it was kind of divided. Um, so my stepfather, again, still very prominent in my life, he was a musician. And he played guitar, he played bass guitar, he played drums, he played the harmonica. He was a blues musician, and which also kind of moves into rock and roll and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I grew up those early years with him, listening to that,
Mm-hmm.
and a little barefoot band kid running around, tripping over wires and amps,
Right.
and and everyone was there, black, white, Jamaican,
Mm-hmm.
everyone. And so I didn't think anything of it.
Mm.
It wasn't until I got to like sixth grade and I too was in this school that I was the only black person. No
Mm.
janitors, lunch
Oh
ladies,
my.
teachers, administration, nothing. I was it. And that's when I got to see, wow, it's not
Mm-hmm.
even much how I see them or how they
Mm-hmm.
exposed me to them.
Right.
They really don't know what to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, kind of going through that and figuring out how to navigate that and still be kind of a complete person, that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I moved from there to 14. I moved to Orlando to a predominantly Black high school. It was
Mhm.
97% Black.
And how
First
did
time
were you able?
I
Yes.
was 14, I'd never seen a police officer on a
Oh wow.
school campus in my life until
Mm-hmm.
that experience. And so that was a big change, me coming out of rural Georgia and then going into a very urban, predominantly Black school.
Let me ask
Uh,
you a question about that. When you're in rural Georgia and
mhm,
you were the only Black person,
mhm.
how did you feel, or how do you feel with the comparison of that experience and then going into a all or predominantly Black experience?
So unfortunately, it was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult. It
Yeah.
was, um, you think of yourself as just you when you're
Yes.
young. And then you get to see yourself through the eyes of others. And while everyone can be mean, I
Yes.
felt that I was considered more of an outsider when I went to the predominantly Black school.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I grew up in Southern California and I really didn't think anything about it. I don't think that my parents intentionally had Black experiences for it. I don't think that was a driver for them, but we did, right? So we had a very close family. And then every summer I would go to Oklahoma and visit with my cousins and whatever. And of course, they're all Black. But there was always, hmm, I don't know if I was introducing it or if it was just there. It's this difference, the way that you comport yourself, your language, the entire thing, and it was always something that was pointed out. And so when I'm in the white environment, I didn't feel that there was anything. I think that when I got a little bit older, I can probably recognize some microaggressions when
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have that language. I had no idea that
Right.
that language was
Didn't
there.
think anything of it.
Right. You're right. And
Didn't think
so if someone was touching my hair, I was an athlete. So I always
anything.
ran, I always did everything. Everybody wanted me on their team because I was a pretty good athlete. And so I didn't think anything about it. I grew up with all of my white friends. I did all of these things. But then when I moved into the Black environment, that's when I felt the difference. And I found that very interesting.
I experienced it the exact same way.
Mhm.
I actually had my sixth grade teacher at that elementary school where I was the only um person of color. Person of
Mhm. Wow.
she I there was something happened. I don't remember what it was.
Mhm.
Something happened and I got upset and I left the room and I went across the hall to the restroom and she came in after me and she just let me be upset. She let me cry. But she said to me, they are just curious.
Mm.
And you have the option of exposing them so that they know and keeping them
Mhm.
being unintelligent or preserving that knowledge for yourself and not. And she
Mm.
was very comforting about that, and she says, your hair is different. And if they want to touch it, you have a choice. You can tell
Mm.
them they can't, but if you do, you're teaching them. And
Mm.
you have the option to
Yes.
do that if you want. So after that experience with her, because it was very
Mhm.
profound for me at that time, I'd
Mhm.
been spoken to like that. I did kind of take that on. So it was like, okay. So then I think it did kind of cloud microaggressions that I do recognize more as an adult.
That's
Um,
interesting. Yes.
but because
Mhm.
I felt I had a responsibility to be almost an ambassador as a
Ah,
sixth grader.
right. As a sixth
As
grader, that's what I wanted
a
to point
sixth
out.
grader.
Wow.
Yeah. Um,
Mm.
then I didn't take on the anger of that. But
Mhm.
then going into the Black community, um, it was pointed out more directly that I was different.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that, and that took longer. That took
Hmm.
longer. I had no one to guide me in that, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting because that is a heavy ask for a sixth grader
Yeah.
to become the teacher of Black culture for the entire school. Like, wow, that's a lot. Um, That is very interesting. And, reflecting back on that as an adult, it was probably inappropriate for her to put you in that position. I like the fact that she gave you language, but I don't know, I feel some kind of way about that. And I guess maybe because I'm a mother now and
Yes.
that I'm going to allow someone to have access to any part of my body so I can teach them. I
Right.
mean, really,
Yes.
I guess I don't know how I feel about that. Actually,
There's
I do. I'm just not going to say it.
listen, there are nuances to that
Yeah.
particular, aspect of my childhood that
Yeah.
we could have a whole other conversation about, but it was comforting at the time.
Sure. Right,
And
because she gave you a choice, right?
right. It was great at the time. I felt empowered at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't end up feeling that going into the Black community and then feeling, the discomfort of being pointed out as other there. I didn't receive
Mm-hmm.
that necessarily, but to take it back to the original question, I don't know that it was even something that my mother would have been able to speak to because she'd never experienced it either. So it would have been hard for her for when I come there, she would just do the, oh baby, they're just jealous, like
Yeah,
that's,
of course.
and it's
Yes.
okay, mom, like, and you just, so I don't think, I think child abuse is harsh.
Child abuse is a harsh word. I would never associate child abuse to my experience, my journey. I think
Right.
there were opportunities there that could have been explored, but definitely not child abuse. Because, we're talking about some of the things that were problematic, right? Reflecting back, they were problematic. But I also think that there were some benefits to that as well.
They're humongous benefits.
Yeah.
I make a casual joke sometimes with my Black friends, and I'll, if we're in an area, we're going into an area, I was like, don't worry, I speak fluent Caucasian. Like, I
Yeah,
got
I can get you in, don't worry.
it. you know,
Now get me
um,
into the Black neighborhood.
right, yeah. Um, so yeah, that, like, I
Yeah.
do feel like there were tremendous benefits.
Hmm.
So it's hard for me to, and that's why it was so kind of important for me to speak with you
Yeah.
and have this experience with you, because I don't I don't want anyone who thinks only of moving into an area where the schools are good, or moving into
Hmm.
an area where they have access to certain facilities.
Sure.
I know people who have moved their kids into white areas because the sports were better, the rec
Hmm.
sports were better. And if these are your motivations for doing that, then I don't know that I will support anyone calling that child abuse. I
Right.
think you don't know what you don't know.
Right. I
And so,
think that, yeah,
yeah.
it's important. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think it's important to recognize that and to appreciate that. And, we talk about you had your your stepfather and the cadre of people that came in and out, that they were very diverse. Like I said, I had my family at home. Creating experiences so that you are immersed in some parts of the culture. Like I said, there were opportunities that I could have explored more deeply, and I've done that in my big age. I'm probably now doing some of that work. But yeah, I don't think it was definitely not child abuse. I think there were some opportunities. Can you speak a little bit to some of those opportunities and how that's influenced and shaped you as an adult and as a mother?
Oh goodness. Well, I feel like, again, the ability to be able to just speak to anyone, I think that that is important. I think that my entire life has been shaped by the fact that I can communicate with anyone. I can communicate with people that look like me. I can communicate with people that don't look like me. And it's because I was just exposed to it so early and so kind of consistently.
Mhm.
Um, I think that that's important for creating your own way in life. We are still the minority here,
Yes.
and so if I'm going to continue to live in this land, then I need to be able to at least know how to communicate
Mhm.
and walk
Absolutely.
the world. So I think that there is a benefit, that like an extreme benefit there when you're
Hmm.
into say corporate America or academia, where you can kind of navigate those conversations, navigate those mores, social things that they they do that are a little bit different. Um, I think that's an extreme benefit. That's going to pay dividends for the rest of my life,
Right.
and it's multiplied in my children.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, how
I
to
agree with that.
now I have created this environment where I've got two children who I'm sending out into the world, and they know how to navigate
Mhm.
both.
And
Uh,
it's not, there was this always this thing like you're speaking white, you're doing whatever. No, I'm actually just interacting with whom I'm interacting with. And so I'm the same way. And a lot of that was where I grew up and the fact that I said like my dad was a Marine. So every 4 years we had to have those being flexible, being adaptable, and being able to assimilate, or I don't know, do we use the word assimilate, but making sure that we were in that environment. So whatever that looked like, we had to be able to do that because every 4 years I was moving.
mhm.
And so I always push back when people are saying, oh, you're speaking white. Like, I don't believe that white people have a monopoly on speaking proper English. I don't know where that came
And
from.
see, well, that's because for 350 years we were told we were stupid and couldn't learn and
Mm,
couldn't do anything. And so we couldn't read, we couldn't do anything intellectual, and therefore how we spoke needed to reflect that.
interesting.
So to
That's very
me,
interesting.
I don't speak white, I enunciate and I speak correct English,
Totally.
the language of this country that I was
Yes,
in. And so I'm going to speak the language, and I want to be
absolutely.
able to speak that language and dictate and speak grammatically. And, I want to do all of
Right.
that for this land that I'm in, you know.
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
it's perfect.
I don't, I push back on that as well.
Yeah.
And what is that saying about us if we continue to push that?
Mhm. Let me ask you a question, and I'm going to say that I also married a white man, and so I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you this question, and you can say I'm not going to answer that or do whatever. Do you think that your environment where you're raised had any influence on who you dated, who you ultimately married, who you felt comfortable with? Because I get that question sometimes, and I'm like, I don't know.
You know what? I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I have thought of that because, of course, it has been brought up many,
Hmm.
many times over the
Yeah.
course of my life. So I've thought about it. I've given it some deep thought, and the answer is still I don't know. It almost becomes a chicken or the egg argument,
Yeah.
like you don't know. Did I just happen to grow up in an environment that I already had some sort of an affinity,
Mm.
or did my affinity grow as a result of being in that environment? I don't really know. I can't say. Um, I can say that I'm an equal opportunity enjoyer, so
I say the same. I always say I'm an equal opportunity life ruiner. I'll just whatever.
right,
You got food, I'll be
but
right there.
I look, I'm not turning you away
Yes.
because of race. That's not going to do it, or
Yes.
color. Um, so I don't know. I don't know is my answer.
That's interesting. One of the things that I have explored, and just a little bit about myself, and so I have been doing a lot of work. Like I said, at this big age, I've been reflecting back. And I can say that one of the things that gets me in trouble sometimes, and one of the things that could have been an influence on who I married, is how people navigate through this world. And so, because I did grow up in white environments, I don't feel like anybody's better than me. I don't feel like I raise my children that no one's better than you and you're not better than anybody else. We just all have our differences, we have our strengths, and we have our opportunities for improvement. But I don't defer to people based on the color of their skin or anything. And so sometimes people say, you navigate this world like a white woman. And I'm like, I navigate this world like I like people aren't better than me and that I have confidence because I grew up thinking I was exactly like everybody else. And so I say that, and then I say about who I ultimately married. One of the things that I admired about my husband and was this natural confidence, like there was no backing down. I'm just going to do. And I thought about that later in life, and I was like, you know what? Not all Black men are afforded that they have to protect themselves. But I didn't think of that. I'm drawn to confident men. I'm drawn to men that are smart, that are confident, and they're funny. Right, and they're driven. And so I naturally I started thinking, wow, was there an influence in that, like a unconscious influence? I don't know. But it was something that I thought about. But I do know that I also raised my children with that same confidence. Like I said, no one's better than you, and you're not better than anybody else. You have your strengths, you have your opportunities for improvement, and so do they. So go out and have fun in this world.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's interesting.
It is, and I don't think you're wrong. Mine was probably a little less grand, only because we were socially disadvantaged, and
Mm,
so I wanted a man with a job.
yeah,
And wanted,
that's a good one.
and I wanted him, but not just. I wanted you to have a plan. I
Mhm.
wanted you to be able to move and
Yes,
in step in your space.
yes.
And he was the first one that did, that he's the first
Mhm.
one that
Yeah,
presented himself in that way.
yes,
And so yes, I found that very attractive, very, this is where I need to be.
yes.
Just so happens he was white.
Yeah,
Like
that's what I'm saying.
that's kind
Yes.
of yeah.
I will say that I don't, for me, I did not put myself into Black spaces, Black and white. So I wasn't able to observe that in Black men because I didn't. And it could be because it was the same experience that you had growing up that I just didn't feel as welcome in the Black spaces than I did in the white spaces. And so
I'm
there's work
still
to be
not
done
feeling
there.
welcome in the
Yeah,
white.
you're still there. I know.
Still not feeling welcome in the
I'm
white.
and I can also say that I'm pretty much a nerd. And so my humor, the things that I like are not welcome everywhere.
Look,
It's
even
an
my
acquired
own
taste.
even my own sweet mama tells me I have white people humor. She says it all the time.
I think I'm the funniest person ever. And I'm
I
like,
am hilarious.
of
No one
one, yeah, audience of one.
no one can tell me different.
The
Uh,
interesting thing about my kids, and we're almost out of time here, but with my kids, we're going to have an episode next week on just growing up biracial. It's interesting because like I said, my ex-husband is white, and I'm obviously not, but I have a young son that is all about if the Black Panthers came back, he would be like, yes, I'm going to go ahead and lead this. He loves everything Black,
that is so
everything.
it is. That's my son.
Izzy. And so the interesting thing about him is that he probably, we would get into arguments with people because he's so light. And people would ask me, I remember this one time this guy said, which school does he go to? And I was like, St. Lutheran, whatever it was. And he was like, no, I think he goes whatever. I was like, well, I pay the tuition. So I think I know. But he didn't automatically think that I was his mother. And Ryan had a huge issue with the color of his skin because it wasn't dark enough. And we were, a little quick story, we were at a restaurant. There was a black family there, the mom, the dad, the kids. So we're really close to him. And he turns to me and he goes, "Oh, I wish I had a brown family." And I was like, dude, should I stay out in the sun longer? What are you saying to me? So he's all about that. So I'm looking forward to having the conversation with him, because he also grew up and went to school for the first up into seventh grade in white environments. And it was because similar kind of about my mom and your mother, that my driver, my values for him was to be a good, kind kid. I knew
Right.
that the academics would come later, but the environment I wanted it to be in, it was going to foster and cultivate that kindness. And unfortunately, I found it in the hippie white schools. And so that's where he went.
That's it. Well, and listen, California is very different. Sorry, my dog is here sneezing.
It's okay.
Uh, California is very different than Georgia and Florida. So,
Hmm.
um, I'll be honest, you can find some white areas that are not nearly as welcoming in the South, and
Yeah.
yet it just so happens, yes, that's kind of where it ended up being. Same with my kids when it was time to raise my kids. And the area slowly, because the schools were so good, the area slowly became more mixed.
Interesting.
And so they were exposed to more diversity. We had like an Indian family, a Jamaican family, an African family, two or three whites sprinkled in the same neighborhood. And then you had us, the mixed family. So
Hmm.
it, it was great. It was wonderful
Yes.
because we were all chasing the schools and the community. Um, and yet he still walked away feeling like he needed to be.
Yes. We need to bring back the Black Panthers. It's like, okay, please stop.
Like, he will be your son's second. Let me just.
Right. Well, Keisha, I appreciate you coming on. I know it was short, but I've always wanted to have this conversation with you when we were in that breakout room and you said that. I was like, wow, okay, this is interesting. So I
Same.
appreciate you joining me. We're almost out of time, so we're going to end the discussion with our question of the week that, well, since you asked me. And so this taxes are going to be due here soon. Are you a let's get it done early, or are you a procrastinator? Let's wait till April 15th at 11:50 p.m.
I've
to do
already
taxes.
received my little
Oh my gosh. Wow.
done,
Okay.
done.
We
Get
are
it.
complete.
And listen,
Yes.
I am now divorced as well.
Mhm.
And I had to do taxes for the first time after
Oh.
I did it. I waited and I procrastinated that first year.
Hmm.
And I was like, I will never do this again.
Well, good for you. I've been, yes, and so I've always done our taxes. And so when the divorce happened, I was just like, whatever. But I am a wait to the last minute. Typically, I have to pay, and I'm like, nope, you're gonna wait and get it the last minute.
Look, if I know I'm going to have to pay, that's different. But I work real hard throughout the year to make sure I'm adjusting those
Yeah,
numbers. I want y'all to get, it was little. I want you to hold just as the smallest amount. So
I
let's see
agree.
how I did.
That's awesome. Well, Keisha, thank you so much again for joining me. Hopefully we'll be able to have another discussion. I enjoyed
I
this, and I hope it
love
was beneficial to you as well.
Absolutely. I really loved it. Please invite me back.
Okay, thank you. That's a wrap for this episode of Well, Since You Asked Me. I hope this conversation left you with something to think about, something to question, or maybe even something to share. I'd like to thank our executive producer, John Dunson, audio and video technician, Ryan Sexton, and graphic art designer, Ellen Jacobs. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and spread the word. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep asking the questions that matter. Bye.